I like to ask this question of coaches when they come on to talk about offense. Coach, for someone who's never seen you all play before, how would you describe what you do offensively?
Yeah, I would say that it is a combination of concepts and series of just different concepts, movements, and alignments that kind of all flow together that give your players the freedom to be able to make multiple decisions whenever they're out there on the court, and ultimately create the space that you need to get a great shot every time down the floor. Hopefully.
I know when Coach Acuff was at Alabama Huntsville that he used that red shirt on almost all of his freshmen that came into the program, and I know you guys all still value player development and what you're doing there at Lipscomb. What specifically related to the offensive development of the guys are you trying to accomplish really that first year, but like the first couple of years as you're introducing the system to the guys?
Yeah, probably the biggest hurdle, or one of the biggest hurdles, is just the vernacular, if you will. Learning all the different names that we have for all the different concepts that we have. So you're learning the concept and the action, and then the word behind it. So that can be a little hard up front for the guys, but really once they master that, it just allows them to move at such a quicker rate of speed through maybe different things that we're trying to teach them.
You brought up the playing quickly. Can you speak to the importance of for this type of system, what playing quickly, playing with pace within that half court does for your overall what you're trying to accomplish?
Well, I think in any offense, you just want to be able to make quick decisions as quickly as possible, so that you can, so the defense doesn't have as much time to react.
Hmm.
And I think in like what we do, we're just trying to. Our goal is to streamline alignments, concepts, movements, so that you can turn playing offense into a series of really simple decisions that occur over and over again, thus creating certainty and confidence for your players.
Hmm.
So I think that's what playing fast is. I think a lot of people think playing fast is how fast you run up and down the floor. I would argue that playing fast is how quick you can make a decision.
When you're teaching the decision making, I've heard coach mention about like the teaching players the feel of the game, teaching players vision. Those two are often tied together. How do you teach that feel and that ability to have vision to the guys?
Yeah, I think it starts with, in the way that we play, there's wide action, but a narrow vision. So there's lots of um, multiple decisions that can be made, but you're really focused on maybe where you can throw the ball. So comparing the way we play to, say, a motion offense, which I've played and coached in before as well, they both have multiple decisions that can be made at any point in time, but where you're looking varies a lot more in a motion offense. You may be looking to the left or to the right or directly in front of you, or should you drive it or whatever. I think in the way we play, maybe the one advantage is there's just more certainty and clarity in terms of, all right, I'm looking here, so there's a narrow vision. If that's not open, I can go here, have these options, and when I decide whichever decision I make, we're going to have multiple reads or multiple options off of that. So there's still a wide action, yet a narrow vision. Sometimes, people talk about having freedom of choice. Sometimes it's better to have freedom from choice, in my
Mm.
opinion, because too many choices slow down your mind and your feet. A narrower focus, created from the clarity and the repetition, I think that increases your player's ability to perform a skill quicker.
I get the sense sometimes when we hear that freedom that maybe some coaches think like they can do whatever. I was even watching you all play this morning. That idea of like narrow vision. Could you also say maybe like each guy has its own responsibility? And while I was watching that, there's a lot going on the floor. I mean, there's all five guys are moving to something, but
Yeah,
within that, there is that, like, narrow vision of, really, I'm only doing, like, 1, 2, or 3 things, but when
yeah,
you have those coordinated efforts, it looks like a lot of things are going on at the same time.
And that's where it comes down to your concepts. And I think, what we try to create, or a 2-man game, essentially maybe on one side of the floor while 3 players are being occupied on the other side of the floor through, a cut or a screen, or spacing. I think when you can create that and create indecision, a split second indecision in the mind of a defender, then you maybe have created an advantage there.
You all do a great job of those other 3 doing things that, to your point, they occupy the defense, but it's, I would guess is sometimes it's maybe just to kind of keep those guys occupied, but it's also creating potential advantages for the next thing that might be coming if a guy comes off a ball screen or whatever on that side of the floor.
A lot of kind of what we're trying to accomplish is streamlining the concepts and streamlining your spacing and um, your reads and your options off of different actions or different plays. So for instance, how can like in my mind, every play can be simplified down to just about one of 5 scenarios. Every time you catch the ball, you can either shoot it, you can throw it in the post, you can drive it, whether that be just a drive or off a ball screen or whatever, towards a side that has 1 player on it. You can drive it towards a side that has 2 players on it, or you can drive it towards a side of the floor that has 3 players on it. And how you space and your options off of those different opportunities that you have, whether you drive it and you pitch it to the corner, or you drive it and you pitch it to the 45, or you throw it back or whatever, like you can create a whole series of concepts there that all flow together, that those concepts may show up 100 different ways, but your players already know how to space and what their reads and options are, depending on, no matter how you start the possession, or how you get into that particular situation.
That seemed to be something that was really helpful for my guys in understanding. Like, there's these overarching goals that kind of guide then what you do within the possession or within like what your action is.
Yeah.
The $1,000,000 question that I always get is, what does the progression for the installation of something like this look for? Understanding,
Yeah.
of course, you guys have them in the summertime. You
Yeah.
have a little bit more access to them in the beginning, but even that is to a point limited. So, what
Yeah.
does that look like for you all? And maybe we would have to condense that down at different college levels or high school levels. But, what does that look like for you guys?
Yeah. And I think if you asked 10 coaches who play the way we do, you'd probably get 10 different answers. What I would say is kind of what I just talked about earlier, is like strip it down to the end in mind, in terms of, all right, let's talk about, how you're going to space when we're driving the ball towards the side with 1 player on it. Like, how are we going to space, and what are our options off of that? Then maybe go back and, initiate an action, a base core element of what you're doing out of your offense, that gets you into driving at a side that has 1 player on it. Okay.
Mhm.
Then maybe out of that same alignment that you just worked on, maybe there's another option that gets you to where you're driving at a side of 2. So now then, so you go back and you show them all the spacing and where they should stand and what their options are when you're driving the ball towards 2 players, and then go back and teach that option that ends up with them driving it too. So, and then maybe like an empty sided ball screen where you're coming off and you're driving towards a side that has 3 players on it. Then maybe later on the progression, you're talking about, how you're going to space whenever you throw the ball in the post. I mean, I think all that stuff you teach with the end in mind, and you teach the concepts of the spacing and the reads off of it. And then you go back and install essentially your offense. And now everything moves faster, because when you get to something that requires a different start, or a different way that you got into it, but it ends the same way, they have a reference point. And
Mhm.
I was a high school math teacher for the first 6 years of my coaching career, and I taught geometry. And like in geometry, you take it's a study for relationships, essentially, between points, lines, angles, shapes, things of that nature. But like you learn more about new relationships by taking simple concepts and then stacking them together to create a new concept. And that's kind of essentially how you build your offense, if you will. You're taking something that you already know, and then when you get back to a new something new you want to enter, a new play, a new start, a new entry, whatever. Now all of a sudden, all you have to connect is, all right, hey, this is how it starts. Now we're right back into something that we've already learned on the first week of practice, which is, all right, hey, I'm driving the ball towards a player with two guys on it, and here's all of our options that we learned. It's the same thing.
I would imagine that you do a lot of that in like your small group workouts. Well, 2 man, 3 man. Do you usually keep it to two or three, and do you use defense and offense at the same time, or do you do a lot of like 2-on-0, 3-on-0, and talk through that before you
Yeah,
get to the defense?
it's a lot. It's probably and be honest, we see the game in 5-on-0 and 5-on-5 as a
Mhm.
staff. That's how we kind of teach the game. We probably don't do as many small group settings as maybe other people, but when we do, get into groups and things like that, then yes, it's definitely um, like, hey, maybe like I said, starting we're driving at one, you're standing here, we're driving at two. All right, this is the same thing as driving at one, except you got this other player standing over here too. So if we throw it to the corner, it's the same set of rules as if we throw it to the corner when we're driving at one. Now we just need to add when we're driving at two. Now, if we're driving with three players on the side of the floor, here's how we turn that back into, we need to cut this way to turn that back into driving at two, which is something they already know. So there is a lot of that, I guess, in the when you're breaking down into groups and going back and kind of reteaching everything, just shoring up those concepts and ideas.
I'm glad you mentioned the 5-on-5. I know you guys, you even in the summertime do a lot of 5-on-5, which may seem really early to a lot of guys. I heard you say that one time to somebody, and they're like, "Oh, wow, that's
Yeah.
doing 5-on-5 already." What's the purpose of that for the guys?
Well, I just think basketball is such a decision-making sport. You know, I definitely feel like there is a time for on-air drill work, especially when you're learning to master a certain skill. But really, the decision is 5 times as important as the skill. Because the decision allows you to get to the skill a lot of times. So it's the same thing when you're playing an offense. Like you can replicate you know the patterns or the concepts or the movements or whatnot, but you can't replicate the decisions that you have to make without playing. And in what we do, because it is a 5-man offense, it's really difficult to unless you're just focusing on one certain element of it, it's really difficult to learn it all without kind of having 5 guys out there, because you may make one decision and one read, and you make that read successfully, but then the defense is able to counteract it or stop it, and now all of a sudden you've got another decision to make. Well, if you only have 3 guys on the floor out there, you can't get to that next decision because you need those other 2 players to continue on in that process.
And I would imagine that the feedback is pretty regular. I mean, not every rep or every stoppage or whatever, but that there's a lot of teaching going on, because I saw Coach Acuff say, well, at one point, you guys will play 5-on-5 for like 30 minutes at the end of practice sometimes.
Mhm.
Like, so is that, again, I don't want coaches to think like just 30 minutes up on the clock and we just
Yeah.
play. What does that look like from a teaching perspective and giving feedback?
Yeah, when I say 5-on-5, we're not putting 30 minutes on the clock most days and saying, "Hey, just play pickup ball for 30 minutes or whatever." And I mean, there's different levels of accountability there. It's usually, hey, we're going to be like, team A is going to start on offense, and we're going to go offense to offense, and then flip it around. So it may be something where we give them, a start in the first possession so that they can really work on one specific thing. And then the next 2 trips down, the offense is more just kind of reading kind of what to do. But that's just, like I said, that's how, Coach Acuff is obviously a phenomenal basketball mind, and you know that's how he sees the game and how we see the game and how we just kind of go about teaching. So at the end of that possession, that offense to offense, we may talk about it briefly on the court, or coach may talk about it, or it may be an assistant pulling a guy off to the side and kind of saying, "Hey, here, do this," or maybe someone stopping and saying, "Hey," uh, demonstrating on the court. It really just kind of varies depending on what from possession to possession on what we feel like the team needs.
That's good. Okay, so there's 5 out, there's 4 out, 1 in with that 1 low, there's 4 out, 1 in with that 1 high, and I understand that what coaches do with their particular teams a lot of times has to do with, level you're at, personnel, that sort of thing, but you guys almost kind of do a combination of all 3, some Princeton even mixed in.
Mm. Yeah.
How would you describe that and kind of the thinking behind that?
Yeah, I think, like I said, it's just a sum of concepts that all kind of flow and fit together. A lot of times, what we're telling our guys is, we have certain alignments on the floor, and we're saying, where's the ball and where's the 5 man, okay? Because where those two things are in relation to each other will kind of tell us what concept we're in at that point, and give us different, options to look for. And I think the beauty of what Coach does, I know I'll probably make it sound a lot more complicated than it is. But the beauty of kind of what Coach does is he really doesn't try to bear the guys down, or weigh them down rather, with overthinking. Like there. And what we do, it's almost like a motion offense in some standpoint, in the sense of there's very little wrong or right. If you make the wrong decision, we just find the next concept and get into that one really quick. And once guys get really good at reading the alignment and knowing what concept we're in, and then, like I said, going back, if you get screwed up, just, are we driving at 1, driving at 2, driving at 3, shooting it, or throwing it in the post? One of those 5 things is always occurring. So just play out of the spacing, play out of those concepts out of that.
Without making you describe it all, I mean, is a good way to describe it. There's almost, as I watch, there almost seem to be triggers that then kind of dictate where that 5 man goes, and if he
Mhm.
comes high, if he goes low, and then the concepts of there's a ball screen, now you screen and roll,
Yep.
then dictates where he goes next.
Correct. Yeah, that'd be well put. Well put. And like I said, those alignments kind of tell everybody kind of where to position and to stand, and kind of what our next set of options are. So
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Post feeds. I guess I just mentioned pick, roll, post up, balls thrown inside. I always like to hear and see what different teams are doing. Um, what are the 4 perimeter players doing for you all once that ball is thrown into your post?
yeah, and heading into that, we're the beneficiary of one of the top mid-major post players in the country, Asan Asajala, who's been a 3-time first-team All-Conference big guy, and is coming back for another year here this year. So we have had to really hone in on what we're doing there, because teams, try a lot of different things to slow him down. Now we're fortunate he is probably the best passing big man that I've coached in 23 years of coaching basketball. But but basically, essentially, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get into a certain spacing that makes it really, really difficult to trap without leaving someone open. So, and once again, everything works better when you have good players. Hassan's a phenomenal passer. He's really good at reading traps and double teams and things of that nature, and passing out of those and making teams pay. So, but essentially, what we're trying to do is cut everyone to get essentially 4 people, including the post player, with their feet along the baseline, and then a man up at the top of the key. So you can do that different ways. Like, one way would just be I throw the ball into the post, and then I screen up for the guy at the top, and he comes all the way around to the corner, and then I pop to the top, and then the next guy in line, will cut to the dunker spot, if you will. So now you've kind of got everybody a little bit low. They've got to decide, all right, are we going to double? If so, there's guys in the corners that are open. If you're going to dunk, if you're going to double with the dunker, then his man's going to have a layup opportunity. If you're going to help from the top, it's a pretty open shot with no ability to rotate um, on the defensive end. So just trying to give, like I said, the big as much space as possible so that he can dribble and into his move and be ready to make a pass if it gets doubled from somewhere on the court.
I found that we kind of introduced similar. We don't do as much as what you all do, although I might steal it after watching it and then hearing you describe it. But it seemed to help with the post players' decision making and accelerating that. Obviously, and if they haven't seen, I mean, he's huge. He can pass, he can screen, he can
Yeah,
dribble, it can do everything, which helps. But there seemed to be there's because there's that consistency of where they're going to be, it allowed him to quickly recognize there was a double team and then make a pass. Did you find that to be the case? I mean, limiting kind of turnovers, that kind of thing out of those traps, because it seemed like every time he touched the ball, he's one of those guys that always deserves a double team.
yeah,
And so you know that it's coming, but he's still able to find guys quickly because he knows exactly where they're going to be. Not just there's this interchange of, well, we interchange, like, okay, that could mean four guys end up anywhere on the perimeter, but
yeah.
he knows exactly where they're going to be.
Yeah, and I would say two things about that. I would agree with you on that. I would say two things. Number one, he's been double teamed so much, he already knows kind of what he's looking for. Experience is the best teacher. Number two, I think it goes back to what we said earlier with the wide action, narrow vision. Yes, there are different ways that we can cut into those spots on the floor, but he already knows before he catches it. There's really only one or two ways that the defense
Mm,
or the one or two way things that the defense can take off,
mm,
and so he already knows kind of where his line of sight is. Now we've played one or two teams that have tried unique things in terms of their doubles, and we may have to adjust a little bit on the fly, or if we know it's a scouting thing, just kind of give them a different line of things to look for. But in 90% of the cases, it's no matter how they double, it's going to be you're looking for the 2-on-1 here in this situation.
yeah, that's good. I hear a lot this asked of a lot of coaches who coach conceptually, but what this is a really big question that could be its own episode. What changes with strategy when the defense goes zone?
I think in zone offense, I mean, we do have some simpler, different things that we do, but also too, I think anytime you can turn your man offense into your zone offense, it's just going to create a shorter learning curve for your players. Now you may be looking for slightly different things, but I think like for instance, a lot of people are familiar with the like the chin series or whatever. Like you can turn chin into a zone offense as well, where you end up with five players out on the perimeter and try to find the 2-on-1, in the corners or whatever. So, but at the same time too, we're probably not going to try to outthink the room. We got a really good passing big man. We're probably going to try to give him the ball either in the high post or the short corner somehow, and like let him do his thing. If they help, he'll probably he's such a good passer. He'll find somebody for a shot. If they don't, they can just back a guy down from the high post or the short corner. That's like I said, we're the beneficiary of his of the type of player that he is. It allows for a lot of freedom and in terms of what we can do as a staff.
I found that my players, once they started understanding the concepts of space, player movement in relation to space, and the ball movement of, recognizing a second defender or recognizing an open teammate, it made our zone offense a lot more potent and go a lot more smoothly. Do you find that?
Yeah, yeah, I do. I think and one thing, like there's two different ways I think that you can penetrate a zone. A lot of people are looking to penetrate the zone with the dribble and draw two. And the other way you can do it is by cutting, is by having movement in and out of the middle or the top of the zone or whatever to with just different types of cuts and movements. So there's probably a lot more similarities than people would imagine. And I think that anytime you can, going back to what I was saying earlier, anytime that you can um, teach your zone offense based on something that's already happened, or relate, what you're doing in your zone offense to something that you're already teaching, or the way you're spacing in your man offense, it's just going to make it that much simpler. So an example of that, like when we drive, when a lot of teams will drive the ball to the baseline, they're going to probably cut somebody to the basket. They're going to want somebody in the corner, and they're probably going to want somebody in the 45. Um, and there's different ways to cut into that or whatever, but you're going to want that triangle kind of formed. And then the same thing in a zone offense. When you throw the ball to the short corner or whatever, you're probably going to want your high post guy getting in front of the rim, a guy on the slot, and a guy on the the 45 rather, and a guy on the corner. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it is a zone. It's a different defense, but the teams can only rotate and cover things a certain amount of ways. So you can, and that, a lot of those concepts will work against both man or zone.